The town of Shelburne was settled 2 centuries ago on Nova Scotia's rugged South Shore. People here still cast a skeptical eye at outsiders. They hold tight to traditional Christian values, fearing God and respecting authority. Clayton Johnson's young family epitomized everything good about the community they so loved. He taught at a nearby high school. She was a housewife. But on February 20th, 1989, it all came to an end. Their daughter, Darla Johnson, was 11.
I remember going to school, and it was Winter Carnival Day at the school, and Mom was supposed to be there. When we let the balloons go, she wasn't there, and I thought it was odd because that's what she was aiming to be there for.
What Darla Johnson didn't know was that her mother had been discovered fatally injured at the bottom of the basement stairs. When later that day, 35-year-old Janice Johnson was officially declared dead, it seemed the entire town went into mourning. Clayton Johnson never got over his wife's death.
There's times that I've said to myself, why couldn't it have been me?
What do you mean by that?
Well, it could have been me that fell and died or whatever, rather than her.
Meaning what, that you would have chosen that? Is that what you're saying?
Well, if such thing as chosen, I'd have chosen myself, yeah. Because, I mean, the girls at that time were at the age that they needed a mother more than, they could have gone by without a father more than they could a mother because of their age.
After he performed an autopsy, the province's chief medical examiner reviewed eyewitness statements, conducted an investigation, and ruled out murder. Family friends like Claire Thompson and Mary Hartley said the usual suspect in such cases, the husband, just wasn't the type.
How would you describe him?
Lovable. Big teddy bear, lovable.
Did you feel the same way about him?
Yes, he was always just friendly and good-natured.
I always thought they were happily married. I never, ever heard Clayton raise his voice. Never.
The symmetry of Janice Johnson's head injuries and a small oval blood stain across from the third step where hair had been found suggested to medical examiner Dr. Perry and police who did a recreation that she'd fallen forward and wedged her head in a gap beside the stairs. A freak accident, case closed. But just 4 years later, this was the image of Shelburne's God-fearing, lovable teddy bear. On trial for his wife's murder, Johnson was viewed as a hulking wife killer, driven by sinful demons of greed and lust.
The Fifth Estate.
Following his conviction, the Fifth Estate reported on how Clayton Johnson almost got away with murder. 2 forensic experts suggested Dr. Perry was mistaken when he ruled Janice Johnson's death an accident and said she'd been bludgeoned to death.
Disturbing questions about judging the evidence.
But a new Fifth Estate investigation into the evidence against Clayton Johnson makes it clear he was wrongly convicted of murdering his wife, and that an innocent man spent the last 5 years in prison.
What do you remember most about her?
It was the most wonderful 13 years I had in my life.
In what way?
We had 2 lovely girls. She was my friend, I was her friend, and she was my wife, so it was just a bond.
You miss her?
Yes, I do.
The recently widowed Clayton Johnson's fatal mistake was falling in love with a younger woman, the Sunday school teacher at his church, just a few months after Janice died, far too soon for the town's liking.
Personally, I couldn't really accept someone in the house that quick afterwards. It wouldn't have mattered who it was. It was just, that was disrespectful because that was Janice's, and you just didn't want anyone else there.
I knew that she was there in the house, right next door, and basically the same reason. It was very hard to see her there that soon.
Clayton Johnson's new wife, Tina Waybrett, says their relationship, coupled with rumors of a life insurance windfall, got the town speculating the pair were criminal conspirators.
We were treated by the townspeople as if we were contaminated. There are some ladies that even cross the street so they wouldn't have to meet us. even though we didn't do anything wrong, they thought it was wrong, so they pressed on, and they just never let it drop, and they just couldn't see the truth through all the lies.
It all might have remained gossip had the stories not traveled down the highway to the RCMP in Yarmouth. Corporal Brian Olford had just returned from a course where in a few hours he'd learned how to spot evasive answers in witness statements. In 1993, he told the Fifth Estate how it worked.
If I asked you what color car you had, and you answered and said it was basically red, by saying it's basically red, you're telling me that there's another color involved in your vehicle. Either it has a black top or a blue stripe, or it's got a green fender because it's been damaged. The answer to someone that has a red car would be, I have a red car, not basically a red car.
Corporal Olford put Clayton Johnson's 16-month-old statement to the test, but has never said publicly what it was in that statement that convinced him he had a murder on his hands.
Based on the training that I received in Ottawa, I felt that the statement was deceptive.
Despite Corporal Olford's confidence in his newly acquired skills in statement analysis, there really wasn't much of a case against his prime suspect. As for the other woman motive, it was a non-starter. There wasn't a shred of evidence that Clayton and Tina were seeing each other before Janice died. As for the insurance policy, Clayton Johnson had to be talked into taking it out during a special drive at his school, along with 12,000 other Nova Scotia teachers. Those policies automatically covered spouses. Not only was there no motive, there was no opportunity for anyone to have murdered Janice Johnson, according to eyewitnesses. That morning, the Johnsons were expecting 2 visitors. Both were to arrive sometime before 8 a.m. Bobby Malloy would be dropping off his 3-year-old daughter to be babysat by Janice, and Janice's brother would also be stopping by. Don and Darla Johnson left to catch the 7:40 school bus. 2 doors down, Claire Thompson heard the girls and called her friend Janice for a chat. Clayton Johnson picked up the phone.
He answered the phone. And he was leaving. He said goodbye to Jan on the phone while I was on the phone with Jan.
Clayton Johnson left for the 26-minute drive to work at about 7:41. And Claire Thompson and Janice talked for about 10 minutes until 7:50. Just 4 minutes later, the ambulance attendants received a call from Bobby Malloy, who had arrived at the house with his daughter and discovered Janice Johnson near death at the foot of the basement stairs. Clayton Johnson was already well on his way to school, and witnesses saw him on the road, stopping once to pick up papers that had fallen off the dash and once more to buy gas. This means Corporal Olford's murder scenario had a serious flaw. Clayton Johnson would have to be in 2 places at once, both driving to work and at home, bludgeoning his wife to death while she talked on the phone. That series of events meant Clayton Johnson simply could not have murdered his wife. Undaunted, the police officers pressed on, ignoring a basic premise of solid police work: that witnesses' earliest statements are usually the most accurate ones. Even so, they set about re-interviewing people. Their first stop was Bobby Malloy, the man who'd found Janice Johnson in the basement that day. He stood by his first statement even after repeated interviews, but one important witness was not so steadfast. Janice Johnson's friend, Claire Thompson.
And so what more did he need? What was he looking for?
Time factors, mostly, as to when Clayton had left the house.
Because you'd been on the phone.
Yes.
So you were the keeper, in a sense, of that information.
Yes.
Well, why was it necessary to go over that evidence again?
I guess probably to see if I had changed my mind on the time, or I really don't know.
By the time Corporal Olford left, the phone call had been pushed back. Now it could have been made 10 minutes earlier at 7:30. And by trial, the length of the conversation itself had shrunk from 10 minutes to a few seconds. enough to open the window of opportunity for murder. But when interviewed recently by the Fifth Estate, Mrs. Thompson conceded her first statement was the most accurate. That would exonerate Clayton Johnson.
Do you think that your first statement is more accurate than your second statement, based on the fact that's the one that you gave on the day that she died?
Probably, because I knew exactly what time. Was doing my dishes. I heard the girls in the driveway, and I thought, good, I can call Janice, the girls are out.
Right.
And I did.
That's what you did. And you talked for 10 minutes.
Approximately.
It seems
The police began pushing harder, pressuring Clayton Johnson and his family to deliver a murder confession. Corporal Olford offered Clayton Johnson a deal, confess, and he'd be charged with only manslaughter.
I can't admit to something I didn't do. I'm innocent. I didn't do it. I wasn't there.
What was your impression of Corporal Olford?
My impression from him, especially from the time he took me in for the 12-and-a-half-hour interview, that he had more or less what you call a one-track mind. In other words, he looked at it as being a promotion, and that was the ticket.
They even pressured his 15-year-old daughter, Darla. A squad car pulled over her school bus, and in front of her friends, she was escorted off the bus by a female officer.
I told her I'd like to talk to my dad first and make sure everything was all right, and she said they had already talked to Dad and that he had given permission for them to do this. So anyway...
Was that true?
No.
They also tried pressuring Clayton Johnson's new wife, Tina.
Olsford would look at me and say, we don't want to charge you with anything, Tina. But if Clayton doesn't say he did it, you could be charged right along with him. And that's pretty scary when you know you're innocent.
Another time, they presented Tina with her predecessor's grim autopsy photos and suggested she'd be her husband's next victim.
They'd say to me, well, how do you sleep at night? And I'd say, fine. You're not scared. And like they would constantly be putting a threat of my life in there like that. You know, they were so concerned that I was going to be the next one.
Toronto lawyer James Lockyer is with the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted. He says Corporal Olford's approach is one he's seen before.
He is on a single-minded pursuit of arresting and convicting a man that he thinks killed his wife. And that single-minded pursuit, again, is something that you see time and again in these types of cases. Tunnel vision is the word or the phrase that's usually used to describe it.
The homicide case against Clayton Johnson had another enormous problem. There was no evidence for murder at the scene. If Clayton Johnson had bludgeoned his wife to death, there should have been what the experts call blood spatter all around the basement. Any blood that was there had been cleaned up by helpful neighbors on the day that Janice died. And original eyewitness statements reported the blood they saw indicated nothing more than a terrible accident. Without blood spatter evidence, building a case of homicide against Clayton Johnson would be impossible. Yet again, Corporal Olford and his partner went back to the witnesses, and yet again, Janice Johnson's friends would provide police with the evidence they needed. Mary Hartley had helped clean up the blood in the basement, and though she'd made no statement at the time, she was now being asked questions about a murder.
What was your reaction to it?
It was like, are you really sure what you're saying here? Because this is the way, you know, we've lived with this. We just thought it was the accident. So then the more it went on and the more it went on, and then it got into statements and recalling all these things. Well, then it just went on from there.
A document obtained by the Fifth Estate provides an insight into how the police handled the investigation. The officers left Mrs. Hartley alone for a time with Janice Johnson's autopsy pictures. She snuck a peek, and it seems her memory was refreshed. Incredibly, she began describing a slaughterhouse, completely contradicting what all the eyewitnesses had said before.
Do you think you were confused, maybe? Is that a possibility?
No, Not what I saw, and I was never confused about what I saw. I saw it, I still see it. If I sleep, if I dream it, I see the same thing. I never tried to draw any conclusion from it myself. This is what I saw, and she's gone, and this is the information they wanted from me, and I just gave it.
Would you identify yourself, exactly who you are?
Mary Davis.
Mary Davis, another family friend, also cleaned up the basement. On police video, she describes a bloody crime scene, contradicting her first statement, which described nothing more than an accident.
It had to be from here that I noticed it down to about here that I noticed the drippings on the wood.
After police reopened the case, every subsequent statement she made contained either inconsistencies or embellishments.
And toolboxes and stuff all down here.
Mary Davis refused to appear on camera.
Hi. Was there some confusion or memory lapse? That's all I'm asking.
I don't know. I don't think I had any memory lapse. What I testified and what I said I did, and that's the bottom line. And I've
Her husband, Raymond Davis, became angry at even the suggestion his old friend might be innocent.
He did it, you fool bastard. He's as guilty as hell.
What?
Darla Johnson is 20 now. She's gone over trial transcripts and witness statements and feels her parents' friends betrayed the whole family.
They claim that they don't want to hurt Don and I, but they don't understand that by them telling all of these lies that they're telling and their exaggerations, they're hurting us even more. I believe they know deep down that what they did was wrong.
What do you want those people to do now?
I want them to come forward and tell the truth. Like, let them take a look at their first statements and let them see how they've changed. All I want to know is why. Why did their statements change?
James Lockyer thinks part of the answer lies with Corporal Olford's police work.
All of these ladies say that they weren't led, they weren't influenced. Corporal Olford was very supportive of them, their best friend, he was comforting. That's what they say about him when he re-questioned them about this event.
Well, you see, a police officer shouldn't necessarily be comforting to witnesses like that, and in fact that's potentially a means in itself of influencing witnesses. So he befriends them, essentially. And do they know what's happening to them? Usually not, no. It's usually very subconscious. I'm not suggesting that they are lying, but I am suggesting that the evidence that they gave at the end of the day, about the bloodstains, for example, was completely wrong.
The case against Clayton Johnson was circumstantial and weak. The original medical examiner, Dr. Roland Perry, was still insisting Janice Johnson's death was a freak accident. So Corporal Olford took his newly revised eyewitness accounts to 2 forensic pathologists for review. Based in part on the newly minted timing and the new and gruesome descriptions of blood spatter in the basement, both doctors ruled it was a homicide. What the doctors didn't know, there was a lot they hadn't been told. Corporal Olford visited Newfoundland's chief forensic pathologist, Dr. Charles Hutton. The two spent 33 hours reviewing new evidence, including the blood spatter video, which made a big impact on Dr. Hutton.
There's blood on the ski pants over there.
And they had these people walking around saying, oh yes, this is how I cleaned. These are the people that helpful neighbors came in and cleaned up the crime scene. They were talking about blobs of blood 8 feet and 15 feet away and up on the ceiling, you know.
Dr. King, call 6311.
Corporal Olford had also consulted Dr. David King in Hamilton, who agreed it was homicide but had some concerns. In a letter, he advised Corporal Olford to get an opinion from a blood spatter specialist. And opinions did come in, but one RCMP analyst confirmed there were no stains indicative of a homicide. Another expert, this one at RCMP headquarters in Ottawa, was unequivocal. In this document obtained by the Fifth Estate, he said it would be dangerous and in error to conclude homicide on the blood spatter evidence in the Clayton Johnson case. Dr. Hutton and Dr. King say they were never shown those reports.
Freakish accident.
We showed them to Dr. Hutton recently, and he now says lack of incriminating blood spatter evidence is a concern.
You must have doubts now based on the fact that you were given things that weren't complete.
Well, I'd have to take the weight. I mean, I didn't base it on that alone.
But in part.
In part, yes, of course. I mean, this just, as I say, tidied up the package nicely.
And it's not a tidy package anymore.
Well, it's not tidy, no, I admit that.
Dr. Hutton says because he never saw important evidence, perhaps a judicial review is in order.
Okay,
we also showed Dr. King the documents that report there was no evidence of blood spatter in the basement. And we showed him the complete file on the Clayton Johnson murder case.
What bothers you the most about what you weren't told, what you weren't shown?
I take very seriously what you say about the lack of bloodstains elsewhere.
And there's yet another problem. Doctors King and Hutton agreed it was a homicide, but disagreed on just about everything else.
You disagree on the weapon, you disagree on the number of blows. He's saying head wedging, you say no head wedging. Yeah. He accounts for the blood and hair on the steps, you don't. I mean, that's a big difference in my opinion.
Yeah, there are a number of differences in our opinions, yeah.
Does that not suggest then that maybe the homicide theory is questionable?
Yes, I suppose it does, yes. And
would you be more willing then to look at the possibility of this being a freakish fall?
Sure, yes.
And that brings the case back to where it began and where it should have stayed. Dr. Linda Norton, a respected forensic pathologist in Dallas, Texas, has been retained by Clayton Johnson's lawyer. She says the original medical examiner was almost right. Janice Johnson did fall down the stairs and wedge her head, but she didn't fall forward that morning. She fell backward.
If you do propose a backward fall down the stairs instead of this frontward fall, and instead of this bludgeoning, that you don't have to ignore any of the evidence, that all the medical evidence fits, the time frame fits, all the things that make the bludgeoning theory rather preposterous suddenly fit.
Did you try hard enough, did you try at all to try to make this a homicide?
I approached it as a homicide and it wouldn't fit. I couldn't get it to fit. And I simply could not unless I started stretching evidence and starting to propose the ridiculous.
If you fell forward, you'd put your arm.
Criminologist Herb McDonnell of Corning, New York, says Dr. Norton's findings are exactly right. He tested her scenario using theatrical equipment and blue chalk to indicate where the head wounds would have occurred in such a fall. He concludes in a report there was no question the death of Janice Johnson was an accident. It was not a homicide.
Do you think he should get a new trial?
Yes. I wouldn't give him a new trial. I would just acquit him and release him. But
you feel that strongly?
Yes, I do.
Really?
Yes, I do.
Just let him out, open the door, let him walk. No review, no more trial. You think this is strong enough, what you're saying?
Yes, I definitely do.
Corporal Olford was promoted to sergeant about a year after Clayton Johnson was convicted. And in Yarmouth last week, things took a bizarre turn. While we were trying one last time for an interview with Corporal Olford, he was on the phone to our office in Toronto suggesting he was now investigating us. But he wouldn't tell us why.
Yes, is Sergeant Olford here, please?
No, he's not.
Oh, I just called and I was told he was in a meeting.
No, he's gone.
Okay. Is Sergeant Olford here?
He's in the building, yeah, but he's being talked to upstairs by one of our higher up.
Because she just told us he wasn't in the building. So
wow, everybody's got their stories.
The other thing we're concerned about, as you can imagine, officer, is that he also suggested on the phone yesterday to our people in Toronto that he was now investigating us.
Who?
Sergeant Olford.
I know nothing about that.
Yeah, that's what he said.
Investigating you folks?
Yeah, and we'd like to know why.
Okay.
For the first time in 5 years, Clayton Johnson has reason to hope. But as he awaits the outcome of his lawyer's appeal to the Minister of Justice, his main concern is not for himself, but for his daughters, Dawn and Darla.
What is the toughest part of all of this for you?
Not having a mother, father to share those special days with.
They've lost both parents.
Yeah.
Because you take my oldest one now, she's graduated. She's graduated high school and she's never had neither parent there.
And when is the next one going to graduate, Mr. Johnson?
The next one, the youngest one, she's in grade 11 this year, so another year she'll be graduating.
What are you hoping for?
I'd give anything to be able to go to it.